to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast with financial planner and retirement specialist Dan Haylett. In this podcast, Dan explores ways to help you overcome the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Join Dan for the journey where he will explore how our wonderful human brain will naturally fight against what it takes to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement. Dan will draw on years of expertise, experience and expert guests to solve the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. My name is Dan Haylett. And so on this episode of the show, I am really excited to be joined by the head of the Centre for Behavioural Research for Aegon UK, Dr. Thomas Mather. Tom, welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast.
Thank you, Dan. It's a great joy to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely pleasure. And look, I can't wait to dive into today's episode. We have had a couple of brilliant conversations, so I'm looking forward to bringing those conversations out to the listeners. And Tom, I think you are as well qualified as anybody really to talk about the emotional and behavioural challenges of retirement, because you're in the trenches every day looking at this stuff. And you're building a wonderful body of research and work that I think is really, really going to help many people with some of these fundamental behavioural and emotional challenges of retirement. So really can't wait to delve into this.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so do I. Perfect. Thank you.
So what I'm really interested though, just as listeners, obviously it's not a British accent that you've got there. So I'm really, really intrigued for you to let us know, a brief lowdown of your journey and how you find yourself doing what you're doing today.
Okay, yeah, cool. So as you say, I'm not British, and this is becoming apparent pretty quickly when I start speaking. I'm German. I was born in Dortmund actually, but grew up in Hamburg. Started studying there. Went to uni in Berlin, where I did a PhD in social anthropology, actually in a health-related field, and that sort of qualified me for my first job here in Edinburgh, the Scottish Government, where I worked in the Health Directorate, which now is actually, I see many overlaps between health and sort of wealth-related subjects when, oftentimes we've got to make decisions here and now that affect us in the future and our long-term well-being. So the sort of like inability or how we can help people make better future-oriented decisions is something that I was interested in pretty early on, and from that job in the Scottish Government through some sort of detours, I landed at Aegon in 2017 to actually in the beginning just to do market and customer research, but gradually sort of grew into behavioral finance and behavioral economics realms. And within that, increasingly, we were becoming very interested in financial well-being and how you can conceptualize and understand financial well-being and sort of, behavioral finance terms. So really appreciating the way that people's brains work, how we're making decisions, how most of the time the way we are making decisions, are good decisions or, are based on useful rules of thumb but why sometimes we're finding it really hard to making the right decisions for ourselves. That in a nutshell is what we're doing. And as you said, there's a small team here of psychologists and behavioral scientists, and that's what we do, really explore that, helping people make better future-oriented decisions.
Yeah, and I've obviously been privy to some of the work that you've done, and you've sent me some stuff over, and I think it's fantastic research. And work that you're putting together in actually a very, very young, kind of a young way, a young profession, right? The research is young and it's fledgling, and it's come on leaps and bounds really over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think we are absolutely starting to discover the impacts of behaviours when it comes to our life, particularly when it comes to that emotional lightning rod of money.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think even like just in the last 5 to 10 years or so, there have been a number of changes, even within behavioral finance, when initially it was perhaps much more about nudge theory and, just making sure that people sort of like do the right thing. And it didn't really matter how they got there. When now I think the discipline is becoming a little more sort of like charitable to, the ways people work, and that we have to appreciate that everyone is sort of flawed, and that emotions are needing to be taken seriously, and we're not just wanting to sort of like herd people like sheep to do the right thing, but we're wanting them to be sort of like motivated and getting the reasons for why they're needing to behave in certain ways. So that is an only recent sort of development that I see in behavioral finance and behavioral economics.
I think that the kind of the positive psychology, Marty Selman and what he did with, it's really starting to come through, isn't it? All emotions were bad 20 years ago. We're now understanding that we as human beings are perfectly rational in our thoughts. Other people might see them as irrational, but actually, I think that's had a big impact, hasn't it, on money and behavioral finance?
Yes, exactly. The influence of positive psychology is big. Another influence that I see is coming from people like Gerd Gigerenzer, who are a fellow German guy, but who is internationally worked. And what he does is he's showing that many of the sort of behaviors that we are showing, that oftentimes in classic behavioral economic terms would have been described as this is this is irrational, or this is flawed, or this is sort of like automated thinking that kind of like needs to be controlled, is actually a really clever way to be dealing with risk and uncertainty.
Yeah, look, I think the number one tip I'll give all the listeners out there really is that the thoughts that you're experiencing as you are making some of these decisions around the transition from full-time work, they're perfectly normal, perfectly natural. And, no one should feel like just because they feel anxious about leaving or they've got uncertainty, that is anything other than normal, that actually can be talked about through conversations and stories, which we'll get onto, I think, later on. There's really good ways that we can make sure that we become more confident and more free, and we don't always feel like we're being stupid for worrying about these things. So I think it's a really good development that we've had, and some again through the likes of yourselves and others, some great research. So Tom, I'm really curious to understand from you, what do you believe are some of the main challenges when it comes to this man-made invention we've come to know as retirement?
Yeah, so I guess there are two really, and we can sort of like unpack them gradually in the course of this conversation. Number one is that, of course, we are not born, or we're not naturally inclined to be thinking long term, right? So we are naturally much more inclined to be seeking instant gratification, to be seeking no pain, to be seeking no friction, just to go the easy path. Yeah. And as a result, we are always much more inclined to be making decisions that are satisfying the needs and requirements and cost benefit analyses of our present selves. Okay, not so much those of our future selves. And that, of course, is a problem, because retirement is something that we're doing on retirement planning. Saving for the future is by definition something that we're doing on behalf of our future selves. But we're finding that really, really hard to be connecting and to be empathizing, to be having a sort of like meaningful and concrete connection to our future selves. So that is number one. And of course, in that space, a lot of work has been done in behavioral economics, behavioral finance, so as to nudge people to make long-term decisions, or decisions in favor of their future selves. And we can talk about those. I guess, in line with what I said earlier, we are, I think, coming to landing in a space where we're finding it's much less about nudges just to sort of ensure that people are doing what they ought to be doing, but it's also ensuring that they are understanding, appreciating, becoming intrinsically motivated to be doing this, so that they are seeing the benefits of doing it rather than just doing it. Okay, so that is number one. Number two, and perhaps that is something for a bit later on, is that we are sort of like taking retirement for granted as a sort of like final stage of life. And of course, it is worth reflecting and considering that retirement, as we know it, is actually a pretty recent innovation. More than 150 years ago or so, it would have been much more sort of like normal to work until we drop dead. So to empty chamber pots, to groom the horses, to build buckets out of wooden material, etc., until we drop dead. But since the last 150 years or so, it's become much more normalized that there will be this final stage of life that we call retirement. And perhaps it is sort of liberating to be thinking that actually, this is a relatively new invention, and we don't, have to stick to something that we invented only 150 years ago, and we can sort of rethink some of those implications of the lifestyle that has become normalized in the rise of, the welfare state and industrial economies. So it's two things really.
Amazing. I can't wait to unpack this. So let's jump into the connecting with us future selves, which I think is so important. And obviously, I think when we talk about that, we go to a point where we're thinking, if we're 30 and we're saving for retirement in 20, 25 years' time. And I think there's a topic on that itself. But what I really want to focus on actually is giving ourselves the ability to connect with ourselves in our 70s. So, if we're 55 and we're thinking about stopping work, I think in order to maybe take advantage of your time and your health, I think we need to vividly connect to ourselves 20, 25 years down the line, and maybe understand that that's going to be a very, very different picture in 25 years. And that should give us the ability to maybe spend our money and our time, and whilst our health is on our side, that kind of thing. And I know you've done a lot of work in looking at those intrinsic motivations, how to vividly connect to the future, and stretching the kind of the mental time horizons, and looking at what point in the future does our kind of that vision become vague. They're the challenges that we face, right? So let's delve into that, because I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, great. So look, perhaps just to sort of illustrate the importance first, we've done some research on this both last year and the year before, where we asked in a nationally representative study. It's a big study, 10,000 people that we interviewed all over the country, as I say, nationally representative. So, a sort of representative share of men and women, of, the age groups and the different income bands there are, and the different regions we have in the UK, etc. And we asked about money, the financial situation. We asked about their incomes. We asked about their, emergency savings, their long-term savings, etc. But we also asked some questions around mindset. So we asked, have you got an understanding of the things that give you joy and purpose? Have you got how do you compare yourself, and how often do you upwardly compare or downwardly compare? Do you have sort of like a life plan? Do you what's your sort of like crisis attitude, etc.? All sorts of things. But one thing we were asking was, how concrete and vivid is your connection to the future? And we were giving some examples, and they were sort of like age specific. Because, when you're younger, it is perhaps really quite a stretch of the imagination to be thinking about retirement, but you can be thinking like 10, 15, 20 years out or something, and that would be some other anchors than retirement. Okay. But what we found was that people who would say of themselves that they have that strong and meaningful connection to their future, they would be 4 times more likely to be saving for the long term, including for retirement, than those that do not have that strong and meaningful connection to the future. Okay, and that interestingly was the case for all income bands. Okay, so you would say that you need, so as to be able to save for the future, you need money. Okay, and yeah, I mean, of course, needless to say, you need money to be able to save for the future. Fair enough. But you also need to have that strong and meaningful connection to the future. And in fact, that is a stronger determinant on whether or not you would be putting money aside for the future than just money. Okay, so that is really just a really, basic data point that shows the importance of the right mindset, and that shows the importance of having that mental long-term time horizon. Now, importantly, when we talk about this, when we explored this subject of long-term time horizon, or a meaningful connection to the future, it was really the emphasis was on meaningful and concrete, and that meant that we weren't just looking at what's your anticipated retirement pot size at age 65, but it was things like, where will you live? Who will you be spending time with? What will you be doing day in and day out? What will give you joy? What will give you purpose? Those types of questions. So it's really a more sort of like intrinsically motivated, meaningful connection to the future that was so important, rather than just the financials and the financial plan. Okay, so that was the sort of like initial data point that we found, and that set us off that track that really we've got to create a mindset tool. Yeah, so in the industry and financial services, we're building a lot of money tools. We're building like budget planners, retirement income calculators, debt calculators, etc. We're building all those tools, which kind of like always suggest that what people need is knowledge of how to deal with their money, and information on what's the right financial conduct. Actually, as I indicated, it's not so much money, it's not so much lack of information, it's not so much lack of knowledge. It's really about mindset. But there's no mindset tool really that exists. Well, there are some exceptions, but broadly, we're tackling lack of information, a certain sort of like financial conduct in technical and functional terms, not appreciating that what we need is a certain mindset first. Okay, so and that's what I say. That's what set us off that track to build that mindset tool that helps people develop future-oriented behavior, to stretch their mental time horizons, so that they have that strong and meaningful connection to their future, rather than just a sort of like extrinsically motivated one that just looks at numbers, technical stuff, etc.
Fascinating stuff. And do you think that, and I've done this with a number of clients, where one of their biggest challenges is around spending money. So, you're 55, you're 60, you've stopped work, you've got enough, whatever that means. We've established whatever that means to them. But what they then really have challenges around is letting go of the past to be able to feel free to spend the money. Do you think being able to kind of, as you said, vividly and concretely connect to the future will allow you the ability to spend, i.e., you don't see yourself being in this health all the time. You see yourself going into a point where, I am 75 and my health has declined, and I am, I'm still good and I'm cognitively fine. But I think that's an issue as well, isn't it? Because I think, we need to ensure that we're linking and aligning our money with what's important to us at a time when we can do it and spend it. I think if we connect ourselves to the wrong future from that point of view, it can give us, you end up having too much money at the end of life, which is as big a problem as kind of not having enough, right?
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, there's a lot of behavioral research now that looks into how to turn habitual spenders into savers. Sorry, the other way around. How to turn habitual savers into spenders. When especially in the States, there's now almost the opposite problem, because we've nudged people to the financial institutions have nudged people into thinking long term, and now they have accumulated a lot of wealth, and now they're not spending it because they're in the habit of saving. So yeah, absolutely, the two are the two are linked. And interestingly, another thing that we looked at from that data that we accrued over those studies that I mentioned was, look, what are actually the determinants, or the variables that determine whether people have a strong and meaningful connection to the future. And again, there's some sort of like basic, assumptions, or often sort of like assumed thoughts on why do people have a meaningful and concrete connection to the future. And one of those assumptions is you need a certain amount of wealth, and that is a fair assumption, a hypothesis, because you could argue that it's a kind of luxury to be thinking about the future, right? Like if you're struggling, if you're finding life hard, if you have like low or erratic income, etc., you may be finding it hard to be thinking about the future. But actually, we find that this isn't so much a variable that matters. Another variable that that one could think matters is age, right? Because you could argue that once you have anchored, once you have made some sort of important decisions in your life, like where you live, and who you marry, and number of children, etc., then you will find it easier to be thinking ahead. So that age really is the variable that matters. No, we find in the data it's not actually the variable that matters so much. Interestingly, the variable that matters most is an understanding of the things that give you joy and purpose in life. Okay, so and in a way that makes sense, right? Because why would you be able to develop an understanding of what you want in the future if you do not even have an understanding of what you want now? Yeah, so. But what we mean by that, and this is work that has been hugely influenced by the work that comes out of Paul Dolan at LSE, as a behavioral scientist, but looking a lot into like happiness and what does happiness mean. And the way he has sort of like defined it is that you are happy if you have a sort of like even balance of pleasure and purpose moments. Okay, so pleasure is like the things that give you gratification, that make you feel relaxed, that give you that make you happy in a sort of intuitive way. Purpose is all about moments, experiences, activities that make you feel competent, that make you feel useful, that make you feel worthwhile, etc. Okay, so you don't want to have just pleasure moments, you don't just want to have purpose moments, you want to have a sort of like even balance. And when you have that even balance, then that's happiness. But the question is, of course, do you have an understanding of what gives you purpose and what gives you pleasure? Yeah. So, and that, I think, links to the question you're asking, about sort of like long-term decisions and an ability to connect to the future, and, sort of like juggling present-day moments and juggling future-day moments. It really perhaps actually begins a level lower, which is a question that invites you to think about, like, what are those activities, those experiences, those moments in life that give you joy, that make you feel relaxed, that make you feel happy, that give you gratification, etc., and that make you feel competent, that make you feel useful, that make you feel worthwhile, etc. Because then, arguably, you will be much better placed to make decisions on how you're spending your money now. Yeah. Considering what gives you joy and purpose, and how you will be spending your money in the future, considering what you know about yourself gives you joy and purpose.
Well, I had a wonderful conversation with our mutual friend Neil Beige on this podcast, and he said something at the end of the podcast, really, which was which was quite enlightening. And it's a very, very simple mental model. It's find the things that make you happy and spend your money on that. I mean, really simple, really easy, but really difficult to do. But I think the people that I work with that have the happiest, healthiest, and wealthiest retirements, which is something I'm hugely passionate about, are the ones that are as clear as or clearer on what makes them happy, and they're spending their money based on those thoughts. So it takes a lot of work to get there, but if we can get there, I think you end up having something that's pretty memorable.
According to, and I find that really helpful, Paul Dolan in his work invites us to distinguish between how we evaluate our lives versus how we experience our lives. Okay, and there's a practical example that I can give here. Actually, this is a friend of mine who I just met on the weekend, who works for the university, right? And she is complaining about a lot of stuff that is happening at the uni, right? She's responsible for administering the lab. She needs to teach unmotivated students. There is pressure to get in funds. There is, bureaucratic work within the different departments, etc. There's a lot of stuff that she finds really hard. Where she experiences working life at uni to be really hard. But then at the end, she says, but what can I do? I'm an academic. I love being an academic. Yeah. So, and this is sort of illustrating the difference between evaluating and experiencing, right? You say of yourself that you love doing the job because you say of yourself, you evaluate yourself as being an academic, but your day in, day out experience is actually pretty bad, right? And this is, I think, what Paul Dolan again would be inviting us to think about. Did you the way to work, the presentations you're doing at work, the drop off, the school run in the morning, etc. How much sort of like purpose do you get out of it? How much joy do you get out of it? You just reflect on those experiences. Don't think in those big terms. I love being a parent, or I love working for X. Yeah, it's more about looking at the mundane activities that are happening day in and day out, and then ask, is that actually something that gives you joy and purpose, like the way you experience it? Yeah. So yeah, it is hard, of course, but I find that that distinction between evaluating life or evaluating certain moments versus experiencing it and working out how you experience those to be quite helpful.
And I think that's a big plus point for this modern day retirement, is that people are putting themselves in a position now much earlier than they've ever done, with the ability to have experiences. So they can, evaluate who they want to be. They can evaluate the good and bad of their career or their identity. And there is an opportunity, if done well, that you can now flip that and have a life of experiences and memories. And I think what's happening is that rhetoric is getting out there into the public, and it's putting more pressure on people to go, I need to I need to absolutely take advantage of this. And I don't quite know how, and I don't feel free, or I'm not really that confident, or I'm guessing. And that's where all the anxieties come. I think there's this real want and desire to have more experiences and, do more of the things we love and less of the things that we hate. But people don't know where to start, because as we said earlier on, we're a maximum of 2 generations into this retirement, and probably only one, really. These people retiring now are the ones with pots of money, and I don't mean lots, but I mean a pot of money that will give them the ability to have flexibility about how they can spend it and experience it.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd love for us just to touch on a couple of bits, because I know you've got some kind of proprietary research that you're doing to think about how we can help people deal with what we've talked about. How can we help people, how can the listeners take some things away to go, actually, how can I start to think about vividly connecting, and how can I start to think about stretching my time horizon and connecting with my future self?
Yeah, cool. So one technique that we are taking forward, we've done extensive research in a partnership actually with the University of Edinburgh that is co-funded by Innovate UK, which is a government body, and we've tested a number of sort of mindset interventions that might work. But the one that we are really taking forward and finding most promising is one that is inviting you to visualize certain aspects of your future in along in creative ways and along those variables that I mentioned, like who will you be spending time with, where will you live, what will you be doing day in and day out. And one of those techniques that we are exploring at the moment, and that it's landing well with when we're testing it with people, is called predictive hindsight. Okay, so that's not our invention. It has been tried and tested elsewhere, but we are, I think, perhaps taking it a little forward with some of those variables that we had explored in that partnership with the uni. So essentially, what predictive hindsight is, it is inviting you to like connect to a point in the future, and then once you are in that point in the future, to sort of like look back and work out what in the future you might say in hindsight you would have done. Okay, so and the way we think this may work is that remember Mad Libs exercises, where you have like a text and then there's like gaps in the text and you need to fill the gaps. It's a creative sort of exercise. So so the way it could work is that you are being invited to think like, in 10 years time I will be, then there's a gap and you put in your age. My partner will be, and then you put in your partner's age. The children will be in 10 years time, and then you put in the children's ages in 10 years time. Okay. And so it goes on. You say, right, in 10 years time I will be living. Where will you be living? In a flat, in a house, in what area? Because, and a gap. Okay, so it invites you to gradually sort of like build that connection to the future. As I said, we had tested this with a number of advised clients in this instance only, who say this is a really thought-provoking exercise that really invites them to think about the future in a way they've never done before. Okay, so and then 10 minutes in, or so, it's an exercise that perhaps takes 15 minutes in total. 10 minutes in, you are coming to a point where you're saying, okay, in 10 years time I will look back to, and then you put in today's month and today's year, and I will realize that I've been quite busy doing X, Y, and Z, whatever you've been, whatever has occupied your mind at that point of time. Okay, be that work, be that something, in the community, with the children, whatever. And I wish I would have done X, again, a sort of like gap, because I think I would have been grateful, my future self would be grateful for having done this at, today's point. So this is predictive hindsight, combined with sort of like Mad Libs, and I'm happy to share a draft of this, and you can put it in your show notes, where people can see how that would work. Okay, so but yeah, in essence, it's this, build empathy with your future by going through some stages that matter, that generally matter to people. In their everyday lives, because it intrinsically motivates them. Then you have that future reference, and then you sort of like look back to today and work out what in hindsight you might say you wish you'd done today.
I think that's such a wonderful framework with which to think about life after work. I really, really do. I think the ability to connect with a future self, or a future position, or a future life, and then look back and in hindsight have a look what you were grateful for, or what the challenges might be, and all that. I think it's such a wonderful exercise. It actually links into the next bit. Actually, when we talked about this before we hit record, But as human beings, I'm a big fan of the saying, and again, another guest on the podcast, Brian Portnoy, a good friend, who has I kind of downloaded this into my brain, and I say it a lot. But human beings are storytellers, not calculators. We live for stories. We love stories, and I think what you're then doing is almost writing in pencil your own story, so to speak, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I really encourage people to start to write. Sometimes I call myself their ghostwriter or their co-author, right? I'm helping people write their story in pencil, not in stone, because life changes. And I think we've talked about this kind of use of role models with you. I've talked with it before, and how stories can help us look at the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And role models, they can be presented as stories. So this is going, role models, the sort of like use of role models is going back to a pretty basic anthropological insight, which is that we cannot not compare. Yeah. So what we think is possible, what we think is achievable, what we think we should be striving for, what we think is good or bad is hardly ever anything that we are sort of coming up with independently, yeah, but it is something that is informed by what we observe in others, yeah, what we observe others are doing. So, I mean, a very sort of like banal, perhaps, example, we did a bit of research here at Aegon a year ago. We're looking at why do people not activate, those who do, why do they not activate their pensions? Yeah, and we let them know, like, you should activate your pension, because when you do that, you will find retirement planning so much easier. You will be able to see your pot size. You will be able to see forecasts like on the go, etc. And there's all those objective reasons for why you should be activating your pension. Now, when we did that research, we found that so we looked at like a number of variables. One of the top reasons for why people haven't activated their pension is because they don't know anyone else who's done it. Yeah. So it's and that of course makes sense, right? Because if you don't think that is sort of normal behavior, why would you be doing it? Yeah. And that's where role models come in, because you could then, you can then convey, you can tell examples, stories of people who've done it, okay, who have done the behavior that you seek to encourage them to do. There's another really beautiful study, and again, I can send the link for that in the show notes. It's been done in rural Ethiopia now a few years back, where an NGO went into the rural part of the country, and in one part of the country, they did sort of like classic education. This is why you should be sending your children to school. This is why you should be using fertilizer. This is how you build credit. This is why you should be saving for the future, etc. So, standard sort of education. Group 1. Group 2, what they did is they just showed documentaries of people who were similar to them, who were also rural farmers, and who did all those things. Okay. And then like half a year later, they went back, and a year later, to find that where they did like classic financial education, or not just financial education, but classic education, that didn't result in anything. But where the rural farmers had seen people like them who had been using fertilizer, who had been sending their children to school, who had, that's where they started doing it as well, because they then sort of appreciated that actually this is normal behavior. Okay. So that on the point of, storytelling and, instilling future-oriented behavior using stories, these are two sort of, powerful examples that just bring that to life and show, sometimes we just need those reference points. We just need those examples of other people who have done it. And then we're much more likely to be doing it as well.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful. And I think, that one of the takeaways for me, for the listeners, is to we are tribal in our instincts. We have herd mentality that goes back thousands and thousands of years, that's still wired into ourselves. And actually, one of the real benefits that our clients say to us is that actually when we get together as a community, so we bring like-minded clients together to talk about their experiences. I've got events that we held 2 or 3 years ago that my clients still talk about, saying, "Oh, if it wasn't for that," I mean, I can provide them with as much knowledge and wisdom as I've got, But actually, what's resonated the most is the story that someone else has told them about their experience that give them the kick up the backside to go and book that holiday or give the money away. And I think it's just fascinating. I think there's the danger of your mate down the pub giving you investment advice. I get that. But I think connecting with people that are similar, to hear their story, to take the best bit. I think it's dangerous to compare ourselves, right? But, we're unique and we've got our own journey, but those stories are hugely powerful that we need to take away, right?
So, I guess sorry, if I can just on your point there on it's dangerous to compare yourself. So absolutely, it can be dangerous to compare ourselves, but I guess the lesson there is we cannot not compare. Okay, it's human to compare, and what we've got to do is we've got to use our inclination to compare more wisely. Yeah, and this is what role models do.
Great takeaway.
I think that is in a way, this applies to like all financial well-being advice. We cannot people to not compare. We cannot even tell people to stop worrying about money because it's human to do it, right?
Yeah.
But we can worry more constructively. We can worry more wisely, we can worry more insightfully, we can learn something about from our worries, we can learn something about ourselves, and then work with that to build that into our plans.
What a great takeaway. I love that. Worry more wisely. Have you trademarked that? Can I take it? Is that offline? Or is it...
Take it away.
That's cool. I love that. So look, what I'd love to, and we've spoken so much at length about that, and it's such a great conversation. I would really like to touch on, before we wind down to the end, touch on the second point that you made, and I think it's going to be briefer than the first point, but it's so important, because I think the question is, are we? You said we've come to expect retirement as the natural last phase of life.
Yes.
What a ridiculous. I mean, if you kind of think about that, right? What a ridiculous thing to have accepted. And so, our life phase is wrong. We've got this thing where we're going. We get educated, we have our career, and then we stop. Which, in a world where we want to retain identity and purpose, that's bordering on stupidity, right? I mean, perfectly rational, because that's kind of what's now ingrained. So to a certain degree, but I'd love to just talk about that kind of, the expectation we've now built in over a very, very short period of time, that retirement is this thing that we just do and then die.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, as you say, it's a relatively new invention. It's been, I think it was Bismarck, the German chancellor, was it? Perhaps a prime minister, whatever, head of state, back then, who invented this thing. And I think it was like at age 70, you qualified for a state pension, which was, of course, ridiculous considering that life expectancy was something like 39 or so. So there were like only 100,000 or so who sort of like qualified for this thing. But of course, what happened subsequently was a massive sort of like expansion of state pension. Okay, so I think there will be sort of equivalent or very similar statistics for the UK. In Germany, it's something like when it was introduced, there were only 100,000 people or so who qualified for state pension, compared to today where it's like 26 million or something. Okay, so the state has only, or the welfare state has only expanded what it is offering in the pension space, and of course with that as well, came that expectation that this is normal. Okay, so we have just normalized it very quick, that this is what's happening. France is quite interesting as an example, because there you see those sort of like violent, outbreaks against increasing the age at which you enter state pension, because people, of course, they are upset, right? It has been normalized. It has been. They've been made believe that at a certain age they will be able to retire and get this thing. Okay, so it's hard to be needing to adapt, but that's the point really. Actually, consider the history of humankind, and this is such a new invention. Yeah, this is such a new idea that there is this final stage of life where we can retire. And you were alluding to this. The reason this is weird is that it has sort of normalized that age is all about a number. It has sort of like normalized, at a certain age you start school, at a certain age you finish education, at a certain age you ought to be in a job, at a certain age, this is when you can access your retirement pot, at a certain age this is when you enter state, and it's like it's looking at sort of like hard numbers, right?
It's quite controlling, isn't it? When you put it like that, you think we're being controlled by some rhetoric that's been made up. Weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's a social construct, right? It's not just been some sort of just made up by some sort of like powerful actor who's inventing this thing, but it's become normalized, it's become institutionalized when you look at our education systems, the way that career advice works, when you look at access to state pensions, etc. There was this really funny story now a few years ago. It was a Dutch guy who sued the state because he wanted to have a younger age in his passport. I think he was 67 and he wanted to be 47 because he said he felt 47, right? And he said, well, if you can change your gender, why can't you change your age? Yeah? It's really interesting. So he failed, but it was sort of like illustrating quite nicely, how we've come to accept this social construction of age, and all the implications that come with it. That really, age is all about your ability to be productive, the degree of knowledge that you have, etc. All those things, right? That has become normalized over those years, and it can be quite liberating, I think, to be mindful of that, because you may be able to draw other conclusions from that. Things like, I don't need to wait until retirement to have a good time with my family. You could take in the UK, there's this thing called parental leave. You can take up to 4 weeks per child under 18 to take unpaid leave. So it's hardly anyone like making use of that. Perhaps it's not awareness is not high, but I know many people who are saying, I want to stop working at age 55 and then spend much more time with my family. Like, well, you're living here now, your children are young now, why would you not want to take time off now to spend time with your children? You don't have to wait until retirement or early retirement to do the things that give you joy and purpose. Yeah, we put a lot of pressure on the sort of like, middle age, because you've got to have a career, you've got to do the, manage the children, you've got to plan for retirement, like all those things, right? But actually, when we begin to think that we have institutionalized, normalized this understanding of age only with the rise of the welfare state, we can perhaps begin to think about it a little more flexibly, and draw conclusions on, well, actually, certain things, I do now, and that perhaps means that retirement as we know it will happen a little later, or I will sort of like phase into retirement. It won't happen with a bang. But comes a little later, or something that I sort of like gradually phase into, because I don't have to believe it in that 3-stage life.
I think that one of the big takeaways for me there is that you get to a point in your life, again, forget age or where you're at, but you get to a point in your life where you've probably accumulated a number of skills, you've accumulated experience, you probably understand more what makes you happy, you understand what makes you sad, what you don't like, what you do like. You understand a number of things that give you the best opportunity to be able to align your life, money, and purpose, and intention and identity, and this kind of always learning mentality, right? Doesn't just because you're 60 doesn't mean you can't go back to school, or it doesn't mean that you can't, re-educate on something you found you've taken as a hobby. You've, massively insightful. I've got a client at the moment that's re-educating themselves on fine art. Art's been a huge passion of his for a number of years, right? So he's in his 60s and he's now kind of back to Open University and doing stuff about fine art. So I think there's always learning mentality. And I think you're, for a very good period of time, particularly now when we're talking about, this is not lumping bricks up a ladder. This is not labor intensive. We can align purpose and passion well into our 60s, 70s, and even 80s. And I think it's so important to do that. So this modern day retirement is one full of that for me. It's find out what makes you happy. Don't think of it as retirement. Don't think of it as the end of. In fact, I think of it personally, having been through this with a number of clients, I'm actually really excited to reach that point, because I see how exciting and how meaningful and purposeful our 50s, 60s, and 70s can actually be. So I think it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I mean the authors of 100-Year Life that has sort of inspired a lot of that thinking, Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. They are also speaking about recreational assets. Okay, so how, like, for the new long lives that we're living, how you need all types of assets, and many of these are the more sort of tangible assets, like property and pension savings and emergency savings, etc. All those things. Then of course there's knowledge, there's social capital, etc. But one of the things that they are saying is like really important to be living a long, successful life is self-knowledge. Yeah, so that you have that awareness of the things that make you happy, that you are spending and earning in line with your needs and requirements, etc. Because if you are not having that knowledge, you will find working much more challenging. You will find challenges that life throws at you. I mean, now we're talking about artificial intelligence wiping out, thousands of jobs. That will be a challenge. We will have to be dealing with this if you are not mentally prepared for this in a certain way. If you don't have an understanding of the things that give you pleasure and purpose in life, etc. Then this challenge will be much harder because it will take you much longer to sort of like re-educate, find out what the next step may be, etc. So that is why self-knowledge is a type of asset that is really important so as to lead those longer lives that we're living.
I think that's a wonderful point to start to wrap up. That's a great, and I think I've said it on previous podcasts, but there's a wonderful rewind button that lets you go back 30 seconds. I think if we can go back 30 seconds and listen to that self-knowledge is huge. So that's a great takeaway to end on. Tom, I'm asking 3 questions of everybody on the podcast. So I'm really interested, and I know we've kind of downplayed the word retirement a little bit in terms of the meaning of it. But what will your retirement look like?
Oh dear, putting me on the spot now. So my retirement is likely quite a long time away. So I'm just 41. It's perhaps a good 20, 25 years away. I don't know. I see myself in a... I see myself close to a city. I like city centers, proximity to city centers, perhaps not living in city centers anymore. But certainly like a close link into a city center. That could be, I don't know, that could be in Edinburgh, that could be, in Switzerland, that could be in Berlin. I don't know, that could be, there's a number of scenarios. It certainly will be with my wife. And it is hopefully close to where the children are. I guess I will be doing something, perhaps some consultancy work, some educational work. I don't know. But yeah, that loosely is how I see myself at the moment in retirement.
Yeah, you got to put yourself in your own predictive hindsight and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I think that's kind of see what you can do. But I think again, it's really important that you've and really interesting that you've led with a vision and a feeling, isn't it? It's kind of, I see myself here because of that, which I think's great, rather than I see myself in a chair with £1 million, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So look, I'm if I kind of turn the tables a little bit, if I'm 55, I'm sitting across the desk from you. We've crunched some numbers. We've established that we've got enough, whatever that means for me as a unique individual. Got enough for that retirement that I desire. What would be your number one tip for a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement?
I think it would be this, what we talked about earlier, exploring whether you have a good understanding of the things that make you happy. So, that could be within work, that could be in family life, that could be in, community, that could be in, whatever, like hobbies or so. Whether you have that understanding of things that give you joy and purpose, because then you would be earning and spending money more wisely, in line with what gives you joy and purpose, and you would equip yourself in better ways to be asking yourself those questions on the future. So how will I be earning and spending money in 5 years time, 10 years time, etc. So really, develop an understanding of the activities, experiences, things that give you gratification and that give you that sense of purpose.
So less time in front of an Excel spreadsheet and more time around the dinner table having conversations and telling stories with people that you want to be with, right?
Yeah, exactly. And really, zoom in. Well, why was it that I was, feeling so happy when I did something that actually, is quite banal, or why was I, feeling down when I did X, so exploring those questions, because that goes back to the self-knowledge, gather that understanding about yourself. You can do that with your partner over a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever, but I think that is really important for financial conduct.
So last one, when it comes to this human versus retirement face-off that we've got, is there anything that I've not asked you that I should have done?
I think we talked about the things that I feel like I have something to say about. So on top of my head, there's nothing that comes to mind. I think perhaps one thing that is worth exploring is this is probably something for a whole entire episode, but it's like, how do times of crises change all that? Yeah, all that what we're talking about, because we are, of course, living in times of crisis. When you just think back the last 10 years, I don't know, political crisis, financial crisis, economic crisis. Chances are that individuals will be hit by personal crisis, be that, illness, disease, divorce, all sorts of things that life is throwing at you. And the question is, how do crises affect all that, which is quite a positive conversation around, what gives you pleasure, what gives you purpose, etc. I don't think that crisis actually would change any of that. But of course, I think it is important also to develop a certain attitude and mindset towards crisis, and that is potentially something that another time is worth exploring. But that is something that I'm thinking about a lot as well.
I think it's really important. We do a lot of kind of what if scenario planning, right? Because the plan is wrong the moment it's created, because it's full of assumptions that we have no idea whether they're true or how wildly wrong they are. So I think it's ensuring that you have some sort of playbook to be able to go to if we know there's something around the corner in terms of, spending more money or inflation or investment returns or, a premature death, these kind of risks out there. But I think what we've learned over the last 3 years is the biggest risks are the one that we can't plan for and the ones that we don't see, and then how you can flexibly adapt your mindset and attitude when they hit, not if, because they will come about in a 30-year kind of journey. And then having someone to have a conversation with them about, I think is really important. So I think you could. There's another 50 minutes on that, right?
Exactly.
So look, Tom, as we wrap up, I really, really want to thank you for your time and your wisdom and the work that you're doing, and I can't wait to read more and see more. Links to all of the things that Tom spoke about will be in the show notes. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so good. And thank you, everybody, for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with me today. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. Subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. We would love to have you along for the journey. If you like what you heard, then we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to leave us a review. And lastly, if you want to explore your retirement plans further, download our free 7-step retirement GPS toolkit linked in the show notes. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of TFP or Dan Haylett. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, so please always seek the advice of professionals with any questions you may have regarding your retirement.